Here we go, 1 o'clock in Germany and in Europe, I think. Hello, my name is Sibylle Moll. I'm head of cybersecurity at Demovo. And a warm welcome to our webinar series, NIS2 Compliance, how to get companies ready for NIS2 within 90 days. I'm really delighted to host the final session of our series out of 3. You had some homework. 2 sprints are over. There were a lot of tasks to fulfill. I hope you are on track because now the last sprint will start. Today, we would like to concentrate and focus on 3 topics. It's about business continuity, and the next one is cryptography and encryption, and incident handling and reporting. And I hope you enjoy it, because as an ICT integrator, our intention is to empower you to fulfill the NIS2 requirements. And I'm very delighted having Andrew Hay, our CISO at Demovo, on board, and he will tell you the next 30 minutes, about what is important to get ready for NIS2. And as always, we intend having an interactive session, so please raise your questions in the Q&A sector, and we will answer them at the end of the session. So let's get started. Andrew.
All right, thanks very much, Zilla. Hello, my name's Andrew Hay. If this is your first webinar that you've attended in the series, I'll give you a little bit of introduction to myself. If you've been through the first 2 sprints already and the first 2 webinars, you've probably seen this. But I am Andrew Hay. I'm the CISO here at Demovo. I've been doing cybersecurity and technology-related tasks at companies for the last, I'd say, close to 20 years now. I'm an infrequent blogger. I've written a number of books. I'm a competitive powerlifter, and I also coach rugby to keep sane in my spare time. But none of those things are why you're here today. So what we are going to talk about today is the final sprint of the NIS2 race, and I'll call it a race because we're trying to get done before October 17th. And this final bucket of 3 buckets is going to be very important, and I would argue probably the most difficult of the 3 to accomplish, which is why I left it for the end, just because of the amount of running around and interdepartmental work you're going to have to do in order to get it done. So that being said, let's review the bucket approach that I introduced in the first webinar. So we had 3 buckets where we had the first bucket was the first 30 days, then the next 30 days, and then the final 30 days. So we are in the final 30-day sprint right now. Hopefully you've had a chance to go through and address, or at least start your security policies, start looking at the basic hygiene, and schedule some regular assessments to occur. Reminder, they don't have to be done right now, but you should have started looking at scheduling them because it does take a little while to get the scheduling nailed down. Also, start revising your risk management approach. Start looking at discovering vulnerabilities, handling vulnerabilities, disclosing them to third parties, and also assessing your partners and vendors to make sure that their security program is at least as good as yours, if not better, but at a bare minimum meets your requirements to continue to do business with them. The final bucket in which we are going to cover today is business continuity and disaster recovery. Sounds like a big undertaking, and it can be, but we're we're going to narrow it down a little bit, and I'll give you some tips and tricks around what I've had to go through over the course of my career to get this nailed down. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptography and encryption, probably the driest topic whenever we're talking about cybersecurity, and then internal incident handling and the reporting of any incidents. So with that, we do have a poll that I'd like everyone to participate in. And if we could fire that up. Yeah, so how often do you test your business continuity plan? And arguably, we should have had an answer here saying that I do not have a business continuity plan, because there's a lot of organizations that don't. They just exist or operate in the hopes that there is not a disaster that adversely affects their business. And I will be the first to tell you that hope is not a solid security strategy. So 47% of you have not checked it for a very long time. That's not surprising to me. More than once a year, that's great that you're able to do that. Less than once a year, that's, at least you're looking at it. That's not to say that you are prepared for the next disaster, but I know a lot of organizations have looked at the COVID-19 shutdown as a very good test of their business continuity plan. Not something that they had planned to do, but the idea that there's a major disruption to the business and they can continue to operate under that pressure was enough to make them feel confident that the business continuity plan was tested, even if it was unplanned. All right, so business continuity and disaster recovery. So this phase of NIS2 is all about making sure that the business can continue operations under adverse conditions. So whether that is a fire, a flood, a global pandemic, a cyber attack, being ransomware, insider threat, what have you, you need to be able to plan for all of these adverse events. And it's not just how you handle incidents, like cyber incidents, it's all types of incidents, because the most disruptive event could be someone kicking a plug out from the wall to your critical server and the business going down for a week. It may not be someone clicking a link in an email. So you need to be able to plan for all of these things. So in order to have a solid business continuity and disaster recovery plan and procedure, and I'll probably shorten that to BCP and DR, and that because it's the most common acronym in the business. We're going to talk about how you need to identify your critical functions, and this is the most important thing in my mind. Then prioritize those service or functions, figure out what your strategies are to make sure that you continue, then plan how to maintain and review the efficacy of these plans and the systems, and then tell people, train them how to handle these incidents. So I think if you've ever walked into a new business and you've had to conduct a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan as one of your objectives, you need to know what the business sees as a critical system. So what is important? So let me put it this way. It's kind of a chicken and an egg scenario, because in order to have a solid business continuity and disaster recovery plan, you need to know where the assets are, what the assets are, who is primarily responsible for the assets, and what is contained within the data. On the other side, you need to be able to back all these things up and make sure that they can become restored. So a lot of organizations will have backup plans in place. Have they been tested? Maybe not. will they survive a natural disaster? If it's not in the plan, then you're not really planning for it. So you may not have that visibility. So this is where a business impact assessment comes into play. And what I always do whenever I start in any business is I will send out a business impact assessment questionnaire to the heads of all the departments and ask them, what systems do you need to function, and do your subordinates and your business units need to function in the event of a natural disaster or incident? And that at least gives me a high level view of what they are using. I then go back and ask them, okay, which of these systems are you responsible for? And oftentimes that will narrow down the scope. So now I have two groupings. I have a grouping in one column that is all the systems they need to function, and in another section, the systems they need to function that they are directly responsible for. So I take the list of systems they're not responsible for, and I focus on the systems they are responsible for. And I ask for the assigned owner, who's responsible for that system? Who's responsible for the data? Who can tell me how that data moves throughout the entire organization? And then we can ascribe some sort of criticality to that data. Because if you go to the executive team and the board and say, we have 5 systems that are down right now, that are impacted and people can't work, which one do we bring back up first? You're going to get, if you ask 5 people, you get 10 answers. You need to, as a business, be able to identify which assets are important for the business to function in a prioritized list. And this is where the identification of the features and functionality and the assets come into play. So a follow-on to that is the services. So there may not be physical systems that you need for your business. It could be a third-party SaaS platform like a Salesforce or Google Drive or Office 365. A lot of organizations can't function without email, or believe they can't function without email. So what is the criticality? How important is it to prioritize the restoration of connectivity back to email or to Active Directory? Many people consider Active Directory their crown jewel, and if that goes down, nobody can work. So you need to have backup strategies for that plan. Just assume that Microsoft's cloud infrastructure, where your AD instance is located, goes down for a week. What do you do? How do people log in and continue to work? So these business impact analysis really help you determine for the business what the recovery time objective is. So how fast do we have to get it back in operations? And then the recovery point, how far back do we need that data to be restored from, so that we can function with minimal downtime. A continuity strategy is a very good plan. Like I said, COVID was a great test of this. I know many organizations that were going to local electronics stores to buy laptops for their staff, or telling their staff to use a personal laptop because they couldn't get anything from Dell or Lenovo out to them in time. So their continuity strategy was a bring your own device policy. So we're going to onboard the bring your own device so that you can continue to work. But what happens if you only buy Lenovo laptops, for example, and Lenovo becomes compromised and they shut down all of their logistics departments and you cannot get their laptops? Well, you need to have a fallback plan and say, okay, if we cannot get X model of laptop or X company's laptop, what is our fallback? Can we settle for a Dell? Can we use IBM? Can we use Macs? So you need to have this documented so that you can plan to keep working and keep operational, because your customers at the end of the day are not going to care if you're using Lenovo, IBM, or Apple's. They want to know that they can still do business with you. There are some exceptions, of course, if the organization will not do business with you if you use a certain vendor's laptop, but again, that's something that you have to plan for. And a communication plan. A lot of people will have a very solid backup and recovery plan, but not have a communications plan to tell people that something is happening or that they're going to be down. And this may be internal communications. This could be communications to suppliers, to vendors, to customers. All of these have to be accounted for, because if someone asks you a question, you need to have an answer as to why you are down and why they can't do business with you, or why you can't accept an order from a partner or a vendor. You need to be able to explain to them why this is. A business continuity plan is only as good as the people that are involved in it and how often it is updated and reviewed. So if you change your infrastructure, but don't update your business continuity and disaster recovery planning, then it's not necessarily useless, but there could be components that are completely out of date and no longer applicable. So if you change infrastructure, you need to update your plans. It is a living document that needs regular review, and as a result, most organizations will schedule at least a yearly review of all of their policies and plans, and a number have scheduled throughout the year regular testing of certain critical areas. And I guarantee you that NIS2 does expect you to have a record of some of these activities. You can't just say, yes, we test it, because if they say, prove it, you need to have that proof. And this is always what I think of in North America. When you go to a restaurant, you'll often see a little sign in the restroom that says, this room was last checked by this person at this time. And that communicates to me, as someone that is using the bathroom, that it has been checked, it's been cleaned. I have a little bit more confidence in using those facilities. And that's the exact same thing that a business continuity plan review or periodic review gives to all of the stakeholders. And speaking of stakeholders, you need to have everyone involved from the business that is required to get systems operational again. So as a security person, I know how backups and restoration should work. Does that mean that I know how all of the capabilities of the tools that IT has purchased to perform this? No. As a security person, and specifically as a CISO, I am saying these are the policies, this is the business need, and these are the security requirements that the business expects to see in whatever tooling and processes IT rolls out. So if you have questions, come to me, but you figure out how to schedule periodic backups of these disparate systems throughout your environment, and show me the KPI metrics that it's happening. Show me that it's happening and everything will be good. I will be satisfied. So you need to give that leeway to the individuals that are operationalizing tools, and you need their input as to what's possible and what's not possible, because current tooling that is purchased may not satisfy all the requirements of the business. And if that's the case, that is a risk that the business either has to accept or treat through purchasing a new technology to supplement what you already have in place, or bring in a third party to help manage that. So it's about risk mitigation and risk treatment throughout your business. And in order to understand that, you need to have the people that understand the capabilities of your tools and understand the business. Once we have these things in place, they're absolutely no good unless you can test them and train the employees as to why it's important. So let's say you're a Microsoft shop and you like to store information on let's say Dropbox of all things. That's not part of the scope of the business's backup plan. So if there is a disaster that happens with regards to your personal Dropbox account, that's, they can't help you recover that because that is not within their realm of responsibility or within the scope of the business continuity plan. So you need to train individuals that if data needs to be stored, it should be stored in an authorized location that falls under the scope and under the view of this business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So people need to understand what is the right way to do it and what is the wrong way to do it. And the best way to make sure that people understand that is going through quarterly or even annual exercises. Run a drill or a tabletop scenario that is very realistic, that shows, okay, our core SAP instance went down. What do we do to get that operational? Can we send people, or our core internet has gone down? Can we send people to a coffee shop to keep working? Can they go home? Are they already at home? Does it really impact their day-to-day, or is it just a slight inconvenience? And start throwing these different scenarios in, and tabletops are a fantastic way to test all of your plans. So I know that's a lot of information, but business continuity and disaster recovery, I'll give you a really good analogy. I worked at a bank in Bermuda years ago, and you would think that banks exist to service customers first and foremost. Well, unfortunately, banks exist to make money. So if the ATMs go down, if the teller operations go down, which do you think of those two are going to are prioritized to be restored in the event of an incident or a disaster? A lot of people say that it's the self-service ATMs, but that is not really the case, because ATMs allow people to remove money from the bank as well as deposit money. But tellers tend to take large amounts of deposits in at the counter. So the bank wants to ensure that money can keep coming in so that they can take that money and turn it into more money through interest and investments and other things that they do in the back end. But it's not a priority for most banks to ensure that the ability to give out that money to customers is as important as their ability to take money in. So if your bank goes down and you know that teller operations are down and ATM operations are down, you could pretty much plan that the teller operations are going to come back up first at the branches. The ATMs will be the second priority. But these are all things that you need to account for. Maybe you are more of a customer first approach and you will prioritize the ATMs over the teller operations. It's entirely up to your plan and your business, your business decision for creating a business continuity plan and how it wants to operate. So now we'll move into cryptography and encryption, and this could be an entire presentation on itself, but it would likely be a pretty boring presentation. I've spoken about cryptography in the past. I'm not a cryptographer or a mathematician, And many trainings have instilled a lot of the basics around cryptography and encryption that you need to know. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, but I do want to highlight some areas here. So NIS2 specifically says that you need to have, there are certain requirements regarding encryption and cryptography and network communications. So what I want to talk to you about is how you implement strong cryptography, the importance of data confidentiality and integrity, which is a key tenet of cybersecurity, managing the keys, encrypting those communications back and forth, really being in compliance with regulatory and legal requirements, and then how you develop software and deploy software. So first and foremost, implementing strong cryptography. You should always use standard and approved cryptographic libraries and models. If you ever work in an organization that says we are going to roll our own encryption, run for the hills, because that is generally going to be a bad idea. A lot of people really love cryptography and think that they can do it very well. The people that do it really well typically work in think tanks and are researchers and scientists that live and breathe cryptography day in, day out. They have put the effort into creating standardized and trusted and vetted cryptographic functions and techniques that you can use without having to try and reinvent the wheel and do your own thing. And as a business, if you have one individual saying, I created this encryption protocol we're going to use throughout the business, it comes down to what happens if that person leaves? What if there's an error and that person is unavailable? What do we do? So you should be using standard algorithms like AES, like RSA, to encrypt your data, because the standardization of the protocols is going to make the restoration and really just the operationalization of your data being encrypted, unencrypted, and handled much, much easier. Now, we can't talk about encryption without talking about secure key management. You need to be able to secure the keys that are used to create the encrypted files. And these are quite literally the keys to the castle. So you want to make sure that these are not accessible by anyone else other than those that need to keep the systems operational, that need to manage the systems that are responsible for the encryption and decryption of data and storage of data. And you need to protect these from being sent out to people that never ever should have access to it, because that allows them to decrypt your data or encrypt it in such a way that you can no longer access it. Data confidentiality and integrity. So though not necessarily, well, I'll change that. It is a key tenet of encryption, because once something is encrypted, it is, the confidentiality is assured, and the integrity using checksums and cryptographic hashes show that things have not been changed since you encrypted, decrypted it, used it last time. So you will need tooling, you will need visibility into the changing of files, both encrypted and decrypted, to make sure that you can use the files without there being the possibility of false information being injected. There are entire books on confidentiality and integrity as it relates to cryptographic techniques and hashing functions. I'm not going to go through that because nobody wants to hear that. But just make sure that you're maintaining the integrity and confidentiality of your data. So any data that is transmitted should be encrypted if it is sensitive. So you will, everyone has been exposed to this through browsing websites securely. You get the little lock icon when you're going to an SSL or TLS enabled site, and that gives you that confidence that it is encrypted, or the communications are encrypted. If your communications, when you're transferring data, are not encrypted, it means that they can be intercepted or viewed by a third party that should not have had access to that data. And that is tantamount to a breach of the data, because someone who is not supposed to see it is now seeing that data. So you need to ensure that anything that is sensitive or confidential or contains person identifiable information is encrypted when it's moving from point A to point B. And we've really been beaten over the head with encryption for years in various data protection laws, frameworks like ISO 27001, NIST CSF. They all talk about the need for encrypting data at rest and encrypting data in transit. So it's not either or, it's the combination of both. So one thing that not a lot of people think about is what happens if law enforcement comes knocking on their door with a subpoena or with an order that says, we need you to decrypt this data. What is your company policy around that? Do you facilitate and decrypt the data for them? Are you in a jurisdiction that doesn't have to do that? These are all things that you need. Please check with your lawyer. I am not a lawyer, with your legal counsel, but you probably should be prepared to facilitate that request. So can you decrypt data and provide it to law enforcement if asked or if required? Definitely something that you need to plan for. But along with that, how do you let your customers know that that has happened and that you've had to do this? You'll see it in a lot of contract language that you have to notify them. You have to notify the customer or the partner if such an activity occurred, because they want to ensure that their legal counsel is ready to answer questions and defend the business. One thing that gets overlooked quite a bit is encryption. If you are developing your own software, a lot of people will either encrypt entire databases but not specific rows, or they may have communications that are not secure to and from different components of the application. So the web user interface will have SSL encryption, allow people to log in safely and securely, but the transmission from one system to another system in the back end is not encrypted, because they say maybe it's too slow or it adds too much CPU or memory overhead. You need to understand that when you're developing something securely, there are various phases and various transmission points of data throughout this living system that likely need to be encrypted, because if someone is sitting on a system and the data is decrypted and used by other components within that computational system, there is a chance that someone can look at unencrypted clear text data and abstract information, steal information, and move it to a third party or use it against your business. Also, when you're deploying, make sure that you're using the most secure protocols that are available to you. So don't use Telnet, use SSH. Don't use FTP when you can use SCP or SFTP. And one of the best ways to find if you are using this is to conduct regular vulnerability scanning and regular vulnerability penetration tests to test just how secure things are. So you may have security protocols for encrypted communications, but they could be very weak ones. They may be non-standard or let's say deprecated cryptographic functions. An attacker can use that to gain access to the data, maybe even gain access to the system and elevate their privileges so that they can do something that the application was not intended to do, or that you were not intending to allow. So regular penetration testing, very important to test how good your encryption and cryptographic libraries are that you're using. Just give me a second here, take a sip of coffee. Starting to get a little scratchy. The final component is incident handling and reporting. And this is one of my favorite areas. I did quite a bit of this in past lives. So in order to be able to accurately handle an adverse incident, like a breach, a denial of service attack, an insider threat, there needs to be a plan and a process for handling that information that goes from initial planning to detection, all the way to sharing and informing your people how to handle incidents. And this is a key aspect of the NIS2 directive, because they want to know that organizations, if faced with an incident, can handle it and get them the evidence or the proof that it was handled properly in order to align with the directive. So one of my favorite quotes whenever I talk about incident response or incident handling is from Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson once said that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And if you've ever been punched or hit, whether on purpose or by mistake, you'll know that it's very stunning. And you immediately go into that fight or flight type of reaction. It's like, okay, well, do I keep fighting or do I run away? Do I defend myself? Do I attack? What do I do? So this is what an incident response plan is made to do. It's made to give you at least the plan for all the different types of punches that you might get in the mouth. So if there's a ransomware attack on a critical business system, what can we do? Or what do we do next? Who do we call? Who do we bring in to help fight or handle this incident? So you need to have everything from the individuals that are responsible in handling the incident, to the executive team for communication, to communications so that they can deal with outbound or inbound inquiries as to why there's an incident, IT staff and application owners so that they can get everything back up operational and ensure that nothing has been altered. There's a lot of different aspects to an incident handling and response plan. And luckily, a lot of people have been doing this for a lot of years. And I always point people to that NIST special publication 861. It's a little old now. I know they're working on a new one, but it's the Computer Incident Handling Guide. And it is really the authoritative Bible for how you should handle incidents and how you should build your plan to handle different types of incidents. In order for incident handling to work, you need to be able to see what is happening. So this is where it's very important to understand what is happening on your network or within your infrastructure, and if you are detecting incidents properly. One of the biggest challenges many organizations face is they'll have a SIM or a log management platform or an XDR solution. And because they have that in place, they assume that they are getting all of the logs necessary for various incident types. Well, if you go back to your incident response plan in conjunction with your business continuity and disaster recovery plan, you'll have the list of all the key applications that are very important for the business to function. And can you honestly map those applications to tools or lenses into your business that can show you if an incident or a suspicious activity is happening with regards to those systems. A lot of the times people will send server logs to their SIM, maybe workstation logs via Active Directory, but they're not getting the whole picture of some of their SaaS applications or some custom applications, because they never thought that they would need to send that information or that it would hold valuable information for handling an incident. So you need to understand what you're protecting, what you're responsible for, and what information you need to handle an incident of the types that you have defined in your incident response plan. Reporting is I'm going to say it's a relatively new challenge. This has come out with a lot of recent directives and guidance from organizations like NIS2, from the EU Council, from who else? CISA in the United States, on how fast you should report incidents and to whom you should report these incidents. We discussed it a little bit in a previous session around working with regional ISACs for your industry or your region, but you need to know what your requirements are with regards to reporting information to those regulatory bodies or those designated recipients. For example, in NIS2, there is the language in there says that you must make a reasonable effort to report an incident as early as possible, but no later than 24 hours after it happens. So you now have a 24-hour window in which to get a handle on the situation, get enough information that you can report it. And that doesn't mean that you have to wrap up every investigation within that 24-hour period, because some take days, weeks, months, even years to properly dissect and handle. But you need to have a listing of the bare minimum requirements that you need to report up to these different bodies to satisfy the requirement. So as part of your plan, make sure that you can determine, what is the business willing to communicate when faced with an incident? How do they get that information? And how do we get it within the next 23 and a half hours? How do we compile that to satisfy the requirements? And another part of that is communication. How are we going to communicate that there is an incident to our customers, to our partners, to the other individuals within the business that need to know? You need to make sure that it's clear, accurate, and promptly provided, because the longer you wait, the more seeds of doubt are sowed into their minds, and people start catastrophizing, thinking, okay, well, they said it was a denial of service attack, but maybe it's a nation state attack, and maybe all of my data is now in a foreign country, and now people are opening up mortgages and buying homes in my name, and now my kids can't go to school, and you just keep it's a snowball that turns into just a huge avalanche, and you don't want to let your customers or partners start thinking that way, because that erodes faith in the business. Now, incident handling and forensics, it is not a casual exercise. This is something that you need to ensure people are trained to do properly, because if you don't do it very frequently, you're likely to forget how you did it. And this is why you need different procedures for handling different types of incidents. The way you handle a denial of service attack is completely different from the way you handle a ransomware attack. So a denial of service attack, you're just trying to deflect the impact of the attack, where in a ransomware scenario, you may be trying to recover the data, you may be trying to figure out how to pay the individual that is holding you ransom. You may be trying to find a workaround to conduct business without having to get that data back. So there's a lot of different tactics that you follow, and you need to have those documented, because what if your primary incident responder is sick that day, or gets hit by a bus? That's always the scenario. You think it would be a global pandemic that people are getting hit by buses, but it's something that in the security industry we always talk about. What happens if the person responsible for this particular activity is not available? Who can pick it up? Well, if you're training them properly, there's a handful of people that can pick it up and run with this playbook that you've created to handle incidents. Collaboration and sharing. Again, I strongly encourage that you join local ISACs and information sharing organizations in your industry, because not only are you helping people in your industry maintain their business, but you're going to get early warning indicators that are affecting them that could potentially affect you. Maybe you're next on the list for a particular attack. So if you share threat intelligence with these other organizations, they will in turn share information with you. And the worst case, if you find that you are not getting value from it, stop sharing. You don't have to share. It's not a one-way street. You can decide to not share information if you're not getting anything out of it. You can find other ways and other threat intelligence sharing organizations to work with. If you don't like one, you're the shopper. You can decide where you purchase your groceries from. Again, training and exercises. You can't expect your team to just have a playbook, an incident response plan, different procedures, and have never tested it. They can't just open up a binder with a thick layer of dust and expect them to just pick it up. I actually use this picture because in martial arts, the only way that you progress is not just by showing up, it's by learning how to attack and counter others' attacks and perfect the skills of that discipline. And that is exactly the same with incident handling. You need to be able to have faith that your people know what they're doing, can follow the instructions, and have the expected outcome at the end of it. And maybe you don't want to take full-time systems off or important systems off just to test if you can get them back up. This is where tabletop scenarios come into play. So work with a third party that is really good at creating tabletop scenarios and injecting these types of issues that stresses your plan, or maybe points out some holes in your plan. Well, it's been a long road. You have another set of manageable tasks over the next 30 days. As before, it may feel like it's going to be too much, but if you started when we started these webinar series, you still have plenty of time before that October 17th deadline to get your house in order and get everything needed to be in alignment with the NIS2 directive. So the same advice I've given throughout this series is get support from your executive team. You need to get their support if they want this to succeed and if you want this to succeed. Block off 1 hour per day for the next 30 days for this project, so you can, because I can tell you, you're going to be in a lot of meetings and sending back and forth a lot of emails, specifically around incident response and the disaster recovery side of things. This may be one of the most documentation heavy sprints, and if you can hold yourself to that 30-day bucket, again, you have time in the coming months to spread that out a little bit. I know summer holidays are approaching. Wouldn't it be great to get this sorted before you left for summer holidays and didn't have to worry about this over the summer? And many hands make light work. Reach out to your peers, the other business units, the other people in your organization that can help you perfect this and get this project done. And you have a host of technology partners and vendors that you work with. Lean on them for help. If you have a certain challenge, for example, if you don't know where to start with a disaster recovery plan, go to a trusted partner, say, can you help me with this? Or, where would you get started if this were you? Or reach out to a consulting partner, say, hey, can you help me build this? I'm under the gun, I need to get this done before October 17th. How do we get this ball rolling? Do you have some sort of methodology or process that can get me started or get this from start to end in a reasonable amount of time? So if you don't ask, you don't get. My grandmother used to say that all the time. It never hurts to ask. Always reach out for help. So I'd like to say thank you for joining me on these 3 webinars. It's been really fun. There's been a lot of information. Please go access the replays on the Demovo website. If ever you have any questions, you can ask them now, or you could reach out to me via email. I get lots of emails a day, so if I don't respond immediately, just give it a little bit, I will respond. But with that, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions you may have.
Great, Andrew. I think the only thing is that we have to really hurry up a bit because we have planned 30 minutes. Now you talked about 50, and our participants were really patient and are on board, so nobody left. Perhaps in terms of time, I would only raise one question that was written. So there's a specific one about the emergency plans. Is it required by the NIS2 directive to prove that emergency plans have actually been carried out in emergency scenarios?
So they will want to see that there is some record that you did conduct testing, or whether it's in tabletop or even just a walkthrough of the plan. They want to know that you haven't just written something and expected it to work. So it goes back to the bathroom example of signing on the sheet that it was last cleaned by this person at this date and time. They want to know when your plan was last executed and last tested, not just written and stamped with a, we hope this doesn't happen sticker.
Okay, good. And the last one, that's more about the encryption. Do you know, are there encryption methods that are really secure, the most secure ones?
My answer to that would be quantum cryptography, but it's not something that you're going to just throw in. The most standardized and available encryption algorithm that most organizations trust is the AES encryption algorithm. I would not go any lower than AES 256, and most tools, if not all tools now, have the capability to encrypt using AES. There's also ECC, which is elliptic curve cryptography. There's RSA. There's a host of different protocols or libraries, but if you have to choose one, I would go with AES 256. It's a good balance of speed and security, and it's been proven. It's one of the unbreakable algorithms right now. So until it's no longer unbreakable, I would keep using it.
Very cool. That sounds like a really expertise advice. So if you have further questions, don't hesitate to get in contact with us, with Andrew in person, or you can connect us via our email address, connect@demovo.com. There will be a response as well. You can join us on LinkedIn to be up to date about the hot topics in cybersecurity and IT. And I think then we can close this session. We wish you all the best for your project and endeavor, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.